Welcome to the Evolved Caveman, where men learn to be successful and happy with your host, Dr. John Schinnerer, as he shares the most impactful ideas and practices for you to get the most from your relationships, your work, and from your life. Now here's Dr. John.
Hey everybody, this is Dr. John back with another episode of the Evolved Caveman. And today I am really honored to have with me Jeff Nischwitz. And Jeff is known as a snow globe shaker. In other words, he shakes things up. He's on a mission to help people shift how they lead and thereby shift their leadership impact. He's an international speaker and personal transformation coach known for his unique perspectives, challenging traditional thinking, and delivering tangible shifts for leaders. Jeff is the founder of the Nischwitz Group, a speaking, consulting, and coaching company, and the co-founder of Cardivera.com, a leadership development ecosystem that grows leaders and their impact. He also co-hosts the Impact Leadership podcast. He's also actively involved in leadership and mentoring within the Mankind Project International. Jeff has published 4 leadership and business books, including his most recent, Just One Step, Walking Backwards to the Present on the Camino Trail. Jeff, welcome. How you doing?
Hey, thanks for having me, John. It's good to be here.
My pleasure. Now, Before we got on air, you were mentioning that you've got COVID and you're still trying to recover from it. So thank you for being here despite COVID. So tell us a little bit about your COVID experience.
It's been interesting. There's everybody's got a different view on it. All you have to do is hit a click search and you'll find a different opinion on it. I definitely was someone who took it seriously and took precautions. I live in Florida, just so you know, because everybody thinks Florida is the wild, wild west of COVID. And in some ways it is. I think it'll be interesting to see down the road some of the mental health studies in terms of what was the mental health impact, not only the mental health impact, but how people got sick or didn't get sick because they had better mental health, somewhat depending on where they're at or how much they had locked down. But I, taking precautions, I did go out from time to time and wore my mask. But I went to an event about 2.5 weeks ago. I'm assuming that was the event because 4 people, including me, that I all know, all have COVID. We believe it was from there. And didn't know what to expect. I thought it was just a cold. And then all of a sudden it felt like a truck had run over me. And I had 3 or 4 days that I was just down for the count. I had no energy. I had all the symptoms: fever, sore throat, cough. I'm at 2 weeks now since I first had symptoms, and I still have them. Like my dad's great. I didn't tell him right away. And then I did, and he checks in on me every day with a text. How are you doing? And I just tell him, I said, I'm a little better every day, and it's incremental. But it's been interesting because it really impacted how I look at the world. Because you sort of know it's out there, but, I get sick. 3 other people got sick. One person didn't have a lot of symptoms. One person who is much older than me, he's 70, ended up in the ER. Didn't stay. And another person who's perhaps the healthiest of all 4 of us ended up in the hospital for 4 days.
Wow.
And she was really sick. And when you think about the uncertainty of sickness, and I've been pretty healthy most of my life. I've had a couple of operations here and things, but I never felt like this is the first time I've experienced being really sick and not knowing what's coming. And I got to admit, it was scary at times. I never was so sick that I said, "Oh, I've got to go to the hospital." But it was kind of like, will I get better? And will I really get better? And how quickly will I get back to better?
Okay, yeah. When you say scary, I was kind of like, is that fearful of death? Fearful of long haulers symptoms?
It was. I'm not sure, John. I guess what you asked the question, I would say it was more. It wasn't about death. Death has never really scared me. I have a lot of peace around death. It was more, what it was? It was more like, how will this impact my life and for how long? Like people would say, like there's things I haven't been able to do energetically the last month. My business is suffering because of this. It is suffering. I don't have the energy for certain things. I'm behind on some things. I'm being patient, but that has an impact on my business and finances and things like that. I also know that several people around me got it from me. My roommate got it. One of my close friends who I used to date, she and her son got it. And so there's this responsibility that I'm more aware of, having had it and impacted others, to say the choices I make impact other people. And we all know that, but I think we forget that. And I don't think I forgot it, but it really brought it home to me far beyond COVID, just being aware that what I do and what I don't do has an impact on people around me.
Yeah. So does it bring up that interconnectivity between all things, all people?
It has. And I will tell you, it's felt like a weight, because when I've been very cautious ever since I got the positive test and who I'm around. But it's like when you make a day-to-day decision, I go, well, I'll just run to the grocery. So I go, well, I can probably go to the grocery and probably be safe for others, because I'll just stay away from everybody. I'll wear a mask. And I thought, well, but wait a minute, though. I'm going to touch the cart. And I know that they're wiping the cart, but what if they don't wipe the cart well? And what if they miss that piece? And it seems like a little thing, but I said, no, I don't know that I can do that well. And, I can go get things delivered, but it's kind of like realizing that everything I do has an impact, which I kind of knew already, but I'm really seeing it in the trenches every day, thinking a different way.
One of the things I find fascinating is everything you do has an impact. And the flip side is true also, that everything you don't do has an impact too. And I mean, I don't think we're very aware as a species of the impact of not doing. For instance, if I'm a father and I don't yell at my son, like that has an impact. And it's just interesting. I've had a client in the past who was a police officer. And, he told me a great story one time of how he didn't shoot a guy. And he had every right to shoot the guy, but it was a heroic movement, a heroic act to not shoot, to hold his trigger finger. And it was the right thing to do. And then when he got back to the station, there was a couple of young rookie cops who were like, dude, you should have taken the shot. You should take, you had it. You would have been covered. And he's like, no, it wasn't the right thing to do. But we're never applauded for that which we don't do.
Yeah, well, I'm a big believer in that. I came up with this saying probably 2 or 3 years ago that goes like this. And I tell people this in terms of leadership, not just, and to me, it's not positional leadership. It's just walking through life. That's leadership, how you walk through life. And the truth is that everything you say, everything you don't say, everything you do, everything you don't do, everything has an impact. And other people witness that, and they have an interpretation of it, and they learn from it, or maybe they don't learn from it. They have their experience is different because of it, and it's everything. And are we really paying attention? And often the one thing I talk about is we have an intended impact and we have all these unintended impacts. And I pay a lot of attention to the unintended impact, because that's the one that we're not even thinking about, and we often don't take responsibility for. And I don't always take responsibility for it. Now I do. So I'm thinking, well, I have that impact. And like a friend of mine last year called me a noticer. Oh, what do you mean? And he said, Jeff, what I've realized about you is you notice everything. Like you're like watching everything. You're watching what people are doing, what they're saying, what they're not, the body language. And he said, most of us just aren't paying attention to it. So you have this different experience of life. And said, frankly, Jeff, sometimes it's a pain in the ass. Uh-huh. Because it had come up in the context of a group of guys were together and for a getaway weekend that we do every year. We did not do it this summer, our second one, because of COVID. And we didn't do one in January, which we usually do. But we had a game night where someone would play games. And I'm not a big game guy. Like, I want to play games for a little while, but I really want to connect with you.
Yeah.
And the next day someone said, wasn't last night so great how we connected? And I remember saying, I didn't feel connected to anybody last night. I said, did anybody notice that we played games for over 3 hours and we didn't talk to each other? The only thing we talked about was the game, because it was a new game and we were all trying to learn the game. All the conversation was about the game. And they said, well, why do we always have to do something else? I said, I'm not saying we do. I'm just saying, did anybody notice that that's all we did was interact around the game and we didn't talk to each other? And so this noticer in me causes me to notice things, and I tend to see those things in myself, hopefully, but in others where I'll say, do they realize what they just did or didn't do and the message that just sent?
Mm-hmm.
Or the cultural message was oh my God.
Well, thank you for sharing the story about COVID. I appreciate it, because I think there's a lot of people out there that don't have any experience with COVID and are quite curious. And I've never seen, I guess, a virus be so politicized. So interesting environment out there in the United States. So let's get to the interview now that we've covered that stuff. So you used to be a lawyer, and now you call yourself a recovered lawyer, a term I really like. So what's the story behind being a recovering lawyer? Is there a 12-step program for that?
There should be. There absolutely should be. Actually, factually, there should be. And I want to be clear on the words, because you got it right the first time, John. You called me a recovered, and then you said recovering. So you took that back on me, because I was recovering for a long time. Because to me, recovering was this process of getting away from that and how others saw me. I practiced law for 17 years. And I've been out of the practice of law now for almost 20 years. And it was a real journey to separate myself, because people wanted to keep seeing me as a lawyer. And the funny thing about that, John, is two things. One is people are fascinated, because I'm always asked about that. How'd you go from being a lawyer to doing this? Somehow people have this vision that people don't quit being lawyers, I think. And that you end up in this whole other place of being this coach and speaker. Like, what the hell, Jeff? The other thing is, people seem to love lawyers. They actually hate lawyers because they're in like the top 3 or 4 of the most distrusted profession. Yeah. But people love it because they see it as a big success. Like, if you're a lawyer, that's a big deal. It was a big deal for my mom. I mean, my mom loved calling me the lawyer. When I quit practicing law, she didn't know what the hell to do. I think she was like, I don't know what he's doing right now. He used to be, my son, the lawyer, like the angels would sing. Mm-hmm. But the truth is, in the profession, to the point of recovery or recovering, the surveys still sadly say today that over 50% of lawyers wish they were doing something else. They're not happy.
Well, most of them won't change. If I can jump in there, because I think that lawyers represent success to most people from a financial perspective, but I don't see being a lawyer as, I don't know, this is my bias, but I don't see it as being very fulfilling or ethically fulfilling. I think that, the training that you get as a lawyer does affect how you think. And lawyers are trained to look for the worst possible outcome so that they can write, let's say, contracts to, here's what happens in the event of this worst possible outcome. And the problem that I've understood with lawyers in the past is that they can't, it really trains you to be pessimistic. And they don't teach you how to shift out of that pessimism when you come home to your family. And it creates problems there.
I think you're dead on. You're dead on. And you talked about the money. The main reason most lawyers won't get out of the practice is they feel trapped by the money. Now, some of they also feel trapped by the status. This idea, I went to school for all this school. I took this big test. I achieved this status. It's hard for I self-identify with the status. But to your point, there's actually a study, I think it was out of Stanford. It's not that old. It was in the last 10 or 12 years. It was so fascinating. They said that when law students go to law school, their typical rate of reported depression is about 10%, which was in line with the culture in terms of reported. But by the time they graduate, so in 3 years of law school, that rate goes from 10% to 40%.
Wow.
Like, does anybody see a problem here?
Yeah.
The process of education is depressing these human beings. Is it, hello, like McFly? I want to go back to this McFly.
Well, there's a movement in positive psychology simply to teach lawyers realistic optimism, and those are just learnable skills. And I think it's important for all of us, but particularly lawyers, to have the ability to shift from pessimism to optimism depending on the situation. And this is, realistic or learned or. Yeah, I guess so. Realistic optimism basically means that you look for the best in situations and people, unless it's high stakes, life or death, and then you want to be cautious.
Well, then they got to decide. They have to have discernment about what is high stakes. Is it really life or death? Is it client dollars? Because I get that's significant. I've been in cases that were bet the company cases, so I get that's a form of life and death. I think there's opportunities here. I think as a profession, because I was in it for so long, lawyers tend to be one of the most educated professions, along with, let's say, doctors. And those professions have a lot in common. They tend to think they typically function as knowing everything. They're the worst at asking for help. It's a reality that's going on. Lawyers are at the top of the list in all the categories you don't want to be the top of. They're in the top 2 or 3 of suicide rates, depression rates, alcoholism, drug addiction rates, infidelity rates. They're come on, folks, this is a mental health issue. Let's just call it what it is.
So I remember when I was coming out of undergrad, I was working in a law firm because I thought, well, I've got a philosophy major. What else can I do with that? Well, I guess I'll go into law. But in working for a law firm for, summer and a holiday break, I realized pretty quickly, I don't want to be in this profession. And one of the reasons was the infidelity that I saw going on in the office. The other reason was that I saw these young associate lawyers spending, 14 hours at the office when they had young kids at home. And I thought, that's not really the way I want to be raising my kids.
That's what I did. That's how I did it. I'm very open about this. It's something I've learned in the rearview mirror. I worked for a big law firm with long hours. Then I started my own firm. So I was an entrepreneur. And my kids are much older now. I have this year they'll be 31 and 28 this year. And if you go ask them these 2 questions, you'll get 2 different answers. If you said, how often was your dad around for events? They would both say he was always there. They would say he never missed events. He never missed games. He didn't miss practices. If there was something at school, he was there. But if you said, how often was he just around? They would say a lot less. Because I made a conscious decision that I wanted to be there for the events. But what that led to me was that I was there for that and I wasn't there just hanging out. And I was actually thinking about that today before this interview because I was reading an article about the head coach of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And apparently he has this policy with his coaches that he tells them, if you miss your kids' events, I'll fire you for missing their events, because he missed a lot of their events and he can never get that back. But I read between the lines, what he also said was, hey, it may mean you have to come back to work after that, but be at the events. And I thought, wow, I did that really well. I was at the events, but the rest of the time I wasn't there. Like, what's that message to them? I'm sure to some degree it was, well, he'll come watch us perform, but he's not going to hang out with us.
Well, and I think the extension of that is what I see in a lot of the executives that I work with is, even if you're around, how present are you with your kids or your wife when you're around? And because a lot of the guys that I know are like, they're home and they're on their phone while they're playing with their 2-year-old. Or if they're not on their phone, mentally, they're back at work thinking, oh my God, I got so much to do. I got to take care of this. So even when you're present, you're not present. You and I talked offline first time we met, John, about presence. And I'm convinced it is the magic elixir of life. And it's the only way that life was meant to be lived. And I still have work to do. But I mean, I can feel the difference and people experience the difference. I'm there. And you're right. It's not about the phone.
The phone is the distraction, but putting your phone away, but still thinking about work and thinking about the stuff you're not getting to, you're not with that person. The experience is not as rich for anybody.
Well, and I mean, I love that core belief that the currency of relationships are time and attention. And I think most men, even if we get the time right, we screw up the attention. And, I think I just want to remind the men that are listening that relationships are a foundational pillar of a happy, thriving life. And so it's really important to learn skills to cultivate and improve your relationships. It's just essential. Like if you have a lousy relationship with your wife and you're doing great at work, which is a lot of the men that I see, that's not a happy life, I would argue.
Well, we just had this discussion this morning, John. We do with Carnivera, we do a book discussion. You don't even have to read the book because we'll discuss the book with you. And we were talking about a book called Transfluence by a friend of mine, Walt, wrote. But in the discussion, what came up was just what you were talking about. And someone on the call said, well, why do we forget about relationships in our leadership at work? Because we know about them in our personal life. And I said, I'm not sure that's true. I said, a lot of people do not, especially men, are not having rich, intimate relationships in their personal life. So they don't know that they can bring that to work because they're not. And I mean, just by that word, John, by me saying intimate, you had a bunch of guys listening who started laughing or got terrified.
Yeah.
What are you talking about, Jeff? I'm a dude. What is this about sex with my wife or my partner?
Well, yeah, intimacy equals sex, right? Isn't that true?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
It's part of it.
Well, it is true that's how we're doing so well in our relationships because we've made them synonymous.
Yeah.
And they're not.
Well, so as a lawyer, you've got all these pressures, you've got all these stressors. We have a tendency towards depression and pessimism. What was your story of, what was your addiction or distraction when you were a functioning lawyer?
I had two, and they're both very common, especially for men. And I would say one is, in my opinion, the greatest addiction we have in this country, in the United States. So one for me was infidelity. Although interestingly enough, knowing myself now, because I didn't understand any of it at the time. It was just something I did because I felt like I just needed it. It was like a drug. But what I've realized now is that was really about a wound. That was about a childhood wound. The fact that I saw myself as unlovable. And so by being in these other relationships, they were always relationships. They were never like one-night stands. They were these relationships where someone would say, I really care about you. Mm-hmm. So even though I was married and my wife is saying, I love you, unconsciously, I'm not hearing that. It's like, so this was all unconscious drivers. But it was one form of medication. But the biggest one was work, just busyness. And this story in my head that in order to be successful, you've got to outwork everybody. And I remember a moment, I was probably, I can tell you almost the year, it was sometime in either 96 or 97. So I've been practicing at that time since 84. I've got my own firm at the time. And I remember sitting at the office, it was like 2 a.m. And I was working on a brief. I was a trial lawyer. I'm working on an appellate brief and I'm cranking out. And I remember pushing back my seat, literally because no one's there. Everybody's gone, and saying, wow, I am good. It's 2 a.m. and I am killing this. This is quality stuff. And I'm doing it at 2 a.m. It was kind of like, look at me. And then it hit me. I said, I'll bet you my opposing lawyer has been at home with his family tonight and probably had dinner with his family and no one else here is here. Why am I so excited that I'm killing it by being here at 2 a.m? And that's when I started to shift, frankly, just priorities. And I got a coach the first time I hired a coach. And it transformed my life and my business because by the time I decided to quit being a lawyer, it's because I realized I didn't actually like being a lawyer, but I was killing the concept. Like I was a very good lawyer, had a great firm, and I had a life. My lawyer friends were like, how do you have a life, Jeff? How are you at home? For those last couple of years, I was at home a lot. I didn't work weekends and I was present because I changed my priorities. So it was doable. And I try and still help lawyers when I talk to lawyers or anybody today to understand it's about your priorities. It's not all about your stuff and your work stuff.
Can I ask you a question about that point? Because I'm trying to kind of disentangle this. How competitive were you when you were younger, or how competitive do you consider yourself on like a 1 to 10 scale, with 1 being I don't care, 10 being I'm ultra competitive?
I would say when I was young, in sports at least, because you got to look at the question.
That's where it starts, right?
In sports, I was super competitive. I would probably a 9 or a 10. Okay. As I got older, I became less competitive in sports. Like today, and I still play, until 2 years ago, I was still playing baseball in the summer. It's just fun to me. And like I play golf, and I don't get upset if I hit a crappy shot, because it's just golf, man. Yeah. So my I'm not super competitive, but what it was about, John, was this. I had a belief that the key to winning is outworking someone. And the harder you work, the more valuable you are. Right. I think it's the more you win, the more valuable you are. See, my hypothesis is that we get trained to be competitive as young men in sports, because most men that I've talked to are highly, highly competitive. They're like, I'm an 11 on that scale. Okay, cool. Have you thought about how that competitiveness is affecting your relationship? Oh, no, I haven't. But I think that as we get older, we get out of sports, but we still have that competitive drive. And I think it shifts to this kind of intellectual competitiveness where, and especially I can see you being a lawyer, right? You still have a winner and a loser in court. And so you put forth all this work, this effort in order to ensure that you're going to win. Well, let me answer it this way, because when you say winning, it's not resonating with me, because that's at least not how I consciously thought about it. But I can tell you this, something I said for years to others. I would say, you might be smarter than me, but nobody's ever going to outwork me. So to me, that was winning, because I knew that the outcome of that, I may not control the outcome, but it gave me the best possibility of winning by outworking you. So when I was on my own and in a small firm, the bigger firms would always they'd throw bodies at you. And I would be like, yeah, you bring it on. You bring 10 lawyers in here. I'll work all 10 of them. Now, where's some of that come from? Some of it was sports, but a big part I've learned was from my dad. My dad's a hard worker, and I used to say he gave me a great work ethic, but what he really taught me was workaholicism. My dad's a workaholic. I'm a workaholic. I still have to work through that to make sure, because I can fall into the trap of working all the time and get my value, my sense of self-worth from the fact that I'm engaged in activities more so than whatever I'm achieving or the value I'm creating.
Yeah, and I love the fact that you brought up the workaholism as part of that, because I think a lot of this comes back to worthiness. And I think that, most of us, I think worthiness is a problem for the vast majority of people out there. And so what do? We work ceaselessly, tirelessly in order to distract ourselves from the uncomfortable feelings that we have, which we really don't want to face, and which, if we just work hard enough, don't come up. And then we get those little wins, and the little wins kind of feed our ego and make us feel temporarily worthy. And, I think competitiveness fuels that. And then we lose sight of what the real top values in our lives are, which would be, in my opinion, family.
Well, I think your point there, I'm with you 10,000%. That's why I said earlier, I think it's our greatest addiction in this country, is the addiction to being in a state of busyness. I mean, all the studies are telling us that people get a sense of self-worth from feeling busy. Everybody I know is busy. I meet people who have nothing going on and say, how's things going? I'm really busy. Well, so I think it's more of a self-worth issue. Pardon?
Busy equals importance.
Well, right.
So if I'm busy, then I must be important.
Here's my premise, John, especially for men, because I think men are different than women in this. I think for men, and you said majority of people are dealing with self-worthiness. Yeah, majority as in 99.99%. The problem is a lot of them are unwilling to acknowledge it, especially men. So they'll attribute it to, I'm just competitive. I don't have self-worth issues. It terrifies men to think that might be the issue, because that feels soft, it feels weak. And to me, it's the most important conversation we can have with ourselves.
But that's why the entree is competitiveness. And then from there, you can dig deeper to go to worthiness. And I mean, and that's why the masculinity conversation really has a lot of meat and teeth to it for me, because I think it impacts everything we do and what we don't do. I remember I had this guy that was, a pretty young entrepreneur, successful, and I was talking to him about masculinity, and he's like, "Oh yeah, that's not a problem for me." And I'm like, "Okay, cool." And then he was talking about how he needed to have a woman who was a 10, in his words, on his arm to go into the club or the restaurant or the bar, so that all the other men would look at her and be jealous of him. And I kind of scratched my head and looked confused and said, "And how is that not related to your sense of masculinity?" That's competitiveness with men, with other men. Right. I mean, I can pull someone that is more beautiful than whom you're with.
Yep, I can best you. Mm-hmm. I can some way best you. I think that's...
And it's also a woman as object, which I think is, kind of nauseating to me.
It is nauseating. And I used to be that guy. I did. And, I've done the work.
And I appreciate you sharing that. Because we have to be aware of it in order to shift it.
Well, that's what scares me, because I think so many men are afraid to even go there, which means it's so deeply buried. How do you address something you don't acknowledge is there?
Well, but that's why I love doing this podcast and having conversations with people like you, because I think one of the safest ways for men to approach this is just to listen to conversations between two men about it. So thank you.
Well, you're welcome. I remember this topic of worthiness and insecurity a number of years ago. I'd been in a relationship and that ended, and I was dating. I was doing online dating, and I remember going out with this woman, and she said to me, we got into a very deep discussion right away. We didn't even have a second date, maybe because it was such a deep discussion. She said, "I just don't understand men." And I said, "Men are really easy to understand." She goes, "Come on." I go, "No, they're actually very simple." I said, "If you look at men's behavior through a lens of insecurity, everything makes sense." And she said, No. Men are really confident." I go, "That's where you're wrong. Yeah. Men present as confident." But I said, if you look through the lens, if you assume that men are insecure and then look at their behavior, everything makes sense. Like, her question was, why do guys, they end up they're in a relationship, but then they start another one before they end that one. Like, she said, they're cowards. I go, well, the cowardice is the outcome. But this is about insecurity. I need to make sure I have somebody who wants to be with me, because otherwise I see, this is why men in general, when relationships end, when their partner dies, typical time is within a year, they're in a serious relationship again. Whereas women, it's much longer. That's not a coincidence. It's driven by something. Mm-hmm. And I think some of it's genetic. I do think there's a genetic element from, generations back to the beginning of time where men don't feel they need to take care of someone or feel like they're looking out for someone. I get that part, but so much, I think, is this inner insecurity. And I will tell you something. Over the last 10 or 11 years, since I first did my first men's weekend, people were really upset when I started telling them later how insecure I had been. Because they were like, "Oh, Jeff, don't tell me that. I always looked up to you as one of the most confident people I knew." And I said, "Well, I'm telling you, it was all a fake."
Yeah, it's a great mask.
Inside, I was terrified. I had a brilliant mask. None of you saw it. It was brilliant and destructive, but it was brilliant to the outside world. But now I've gone from a place of outwardly projecting confidence to do the work in here, to take a look at myself, to get honest, to go through the mess, go through the mud, go through the pain, to come out more authentically me. So I'm not here to impress anybody anymore. Does that show up? I'm sure it does, but it's got to be a tiny little sliver now. I'm just showing up as me.
Part of that, I think, is moving from external validation to internal validation. That is such a huge shift for the men that I work with, in that, I think when we're young, we're looking for those outside accolades, for people to tell us how great we are, or how handsome we are, or how, whatever, wealthy we are or confident we are. And as you shift to structuring your life around your core values, then you can go more with internal validation and learn how to pat yourself on the back for, let's say, behaving ethically, among other things.
Well, that was very true for me. And, I know I've told this story many times. When I left that men's weekend I did in April of 2010, the most profound shift that I had coming out of that was I went into that weekend not thinking about it, but if you'd asked me, I would have said, you know what? I think I'm a good man. Mm-hmm. But when I left, that was clearly not true for me. When I left, I said, you're not a good man. You're a nice guy, but you're not a good man. And the nice guy was everybody liked me. Mm-hmm. Everybody wanted to be around me. I was very popular. I was networked like crazy. I was always helping everybody out so that they would want to be around me. But the truth is, I was frankly broken in here. But that was the commitment I made that weekend. I said, I'm going to be a good man, but I got to figure out what that looks like and how do I show up differently. And I'm going to go do the work so I can look in the mirror as I do today and say, I'm a good man.
So Jeff, let me ask you, what's the problem with being a nice guy and trying to please everyone else?
It's shallow, it's hollow, and it comes from a place of insecurity. And if you think about just those words, think about it. Do you want to be a nice guy or a good man? That to me just resonates different energy to me. Mm-hmm. Nice guy is like, first of all, I'd say, what the hell does that mean? Nice guy. What does that mean? You do all this stuff for everybody else. Why? Well, because it makes me feel better about me because I'm so insecure that I got to keep making sure I have no boundaries for myself.
There you go.
I don't do anything for myself. I do everything for everybody else. And then I resent them, even though I set it up.
Yep.
I'm angry at them. Like, why are you always getting help from me? Oh, because I set that up. I'm doing it.
I tell clients that the fastest path to misery is to try and please everyone else. Because I think that it's the surest way to compromise your own values, if you're even aware of your values at that point. And so you're always going to be compromising your own integrity. And I think that boundaries are a huge part of that. I think it's, partly it's people pleasing, that we don't want to disappoint anyone. And it just leads to, and I think part of it also is an aversion to conflict for a lot of men that I deal with, that we don't want to be in conflict with people because we don't know how to handle it well, because we're afraid of losing our temper. And then we just try and please everyone else. And we just get exhausted because people are just taking from our energy reserves and we're not putting anything back in.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of boundaries. And to me, there's a direct correlation. The people who are most grounded in who they are and in their self-worth are the best at setting healthy boundaries.
So let me ask you this, because this one really interests me. So I'm assuming at some point in your life, you were not very good at setting those personal boundaries. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Okay. Right. So how did it feel to you at first, if you remember, when you first started putting those boundaries into place and telling people, no, I can't do that because, how did that feel to you internally? Do you remember?
Terrifying. It was terrifying.
What else?
Well, the terror was that if I don't say yes, they're not going to like me. They're not going to want to be around me. They're going to be disappointed in me, which is going to feed my disappointment in myself.
Right.
And what shifted for me was there was a progression, because all those words you just used early on, those were the words I used. Like, I can't do that. But where I really felt empowered is when I was really saying, Jeff, I'm worthy of boundaries and I get to choose. So when I tell people now, I don't use the word can't. I won't use the word can't because it's an excuse. I could do it. I'm choosing not to. So now when I say that, when I set a boundary, I usually use the word choice. Like, I just had it recently. Someone approached me about getting involved with an organization. I did not say I can't. I've got too much going on. I said, I really appreciate the invitation. I do have a lot going on. And because some other things are priorities to me, I'm going to choose to say no to this. I really think it's great what you're doing, but I use the word choice to remind me that this is a choice and not to hide behind the I can't.
I love the subtle shift in language there.
Well, what I've also found about that, John, is that most people respect a choice. They don't respect can't. Mm-hmm. Like when you say to someone,
they can argue can't.
Well, yeah, I can't because I'm really busy. Well, they're really busy too. Mm-hmm. But when I say to someone, if I said to you, John, I've got some other priorities right now, and I'm going to choose to honor those commitments, and I'm going to choose to say no to this one, that's a tough one to push back on. Like, what do you do with that? You go, I don't agree with your priorities, Jeff. You're going to change. Well, I don't want you to make that choice. People never argue with me now. Partly because it's coming from a place of, I'm choosing this boundary right here.
Did you ever feel like you were being mean or selfish, or the way I describe it is I felt like I was being an asshole at first when I first started putting down boundaries to focus on self-care as one of my top values?
I did. But intellectually, I knew that wasn't true. That's why for me, it was more the fear. Am I going to be alone because I set boundaries? And that was a big shift for me too. For a guy who's a people pleaser, who wants people to like him, a lot of my friends don't understand this, John. Some do. I'm guessing you will. A number of years ago, I said, I realized that if I'm really going to be myself and live my life authentically and just be who I am, in order to do that, I have to be willing to risk losing everyone. Doesn't mean I will lose everyone, but I need to be willing to risk it, because otherwise I'll be playing the game. And it was funny because most of my friends would say, well, you'd never lose me. I said, that's not what I'm talking about. This is about my work in here to say that I am worthy enough, just who I am, that people will be in my life because of who I am, not what I do for them. And now I can do things for them. Now I can support them. Now I can offer help from a really healthy place. It's not a selfish place, because when I'm helping everybody because how it makes me feel, that's about me, not them. And
I love that. I totally get that. Sorry for interrupting, but I think we are, right? Chris Christopherson said we're walking contradictions. I think that's true. I think we're also walking paradoxes. So, just that idea or that thought that I am big enough to contain multitudes, or I am big enough to contain contradictions and paradoxes. I love the idea that, for instance, like, it's only to the extent that you embrace death that you can truly live life. It's only to the extent that you get comfortable with divorce that you can really be in a marriage. So I completely get where you're coming from.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the word paradox, because to me, paradox is one of those tools in our mindsets that if you don't embrace paradox, I don't know how you navigate this world.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how I did it without it, because the ability to hold that space, and so everything's a paradox. Mm-hmm. And people say, you mean everything? I said, yeah, pretty much everything. Because what does it mean to say, like with helping people? If I help everybody, they still get the gift of the help. They do get it because I helped them. But if I help them because I don't feel good about myself, then I did it for the wrong reason, and I really did it for me. But if I can change and do it from a really good place and do it when I want to versus doing it because I feel like I have to be loved, either way, they get the gift, but I'm showing up differently. I'm getting clear about who I am. And that's that. There's so many of those examples we've talked about today are that paradox. Like, here's one. How can you be humble and confident at the same time? Mm-hmm. Paradox.
Well, I remember I struggled for years with the idea of believing in God, because, UC Berkeley, they just drill science and research into you, right? And so that part of me that is scientific, rational, logical, knows there cannot be empirical proof of God's existence. But there's another part of me, emotional, spiritual, that chooses to believe in the existence of God simply because I find it comforting. And so I simultaneously believe in God's existence and don't. I'm okay with that.
That's just I saw a T-shirt years ago. I wish I could remember where. I'm sure I could find it. It said, "Just another day in paradox." I remember seeing that, thinking, "Oh my God, that's just like every day of our lives."
There's also a winery called Paradox. It's Duckhorn Winery. It's I don't know how they spell it, but it's DUXX, Ducks. Good wine.
It sounds familiar, and I'm a wine guy. I think I've heard of that.
Yeah,
I love cool names.
They've got a bunch of different wine brands, but Migration and great winery.
It is.
So, let's go a little bit. We only got about 10 minutes left. Let's go a little bit into, the Mankind Project and your experience there, because I see that as seminal to your growth. And I've interviewed several MKP people on here because honestly, their growth and spiritual gender development is impressive. So what was your experience with MKP?
Well, people always ask, like, how did I get there? Why did I go to this retreat? And the best answer is I trusted my friends. I didn't know I was going for a reason. I didn't know why I was going. I wasn't at some sort of tipping point in my life. If you'd asked me then, I would have said, everything's fine. Although when I look back, I go, everything's fine. What does that really mean? I was in the middle of a divorce, the ending of a marriage, had a disconnected relationship with my son. Yeah, professionally, I was doing okay. But I was like in that, hey, I'm fine. Everything's fine. But I had two friends that one had been through this before. One was actually going. And they just kept gently reminding me. And I remember this moment of like listening to the moment. I was sitting in my office at home and realizing this weekend was about 3 weeks out and I hadn't committed yet. And I literally pushed away from the desk. I remember going, you got to decide. Now you're going to decide, Jeff. So I pushed back to make a decision. And as soon as I pushed back, my email dinged. And I took the out because I went, I'm going to go look at the email so I don't have to decide. And it was an email from one of those guys saying, I don't mean to bother you, but what are you thinking? And I just went, there's it. I mean, here I am trying to avoid a decision and he emails me. So I called him and I said, I'm in. And I remember this going to the weekend, you do a call before the weekend. And this guy said, like a prep interview, he said, what are your expectations? I said, I have none. What research have you done? None. Do you have any questions? No. He goes, this is going to be like the shortest interview ever, Jeff. You're very unusual. I said, well, I'm learning to just trust. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to just show up and be open. And I remember the experience was a lot of resistance once I got there because this thought kept going through my head. And whenever it did, like in a calm moment, I said this to myself, that can't be it. And I'm not going there. And it had to do with my father and my brother who's deceased. And I kept saying, that can't be it, and I'm not going there. But then the moment of truth came, and I surrendered to the moment, started my work, and just felt so many shifts in me. I said, I just want more of this. I'm hungry for this. And that big part was not that MKP used the word. MKP's mission is to help men show up as more authentic, vulnerable, empowered men versus men playing the games that most of us have been taught. But for me, that thing about nice guy versus good man, and maybe it was about my kids and I wanted to be a good man as a model. And then I started to figure out what that mean. And I started creating values and got a mission statement. And when people say their values are to be nice people, I go, what does that mean? How do you know? So to me, if you can't tell me what your values are, you don't really have values. And now I got it down to 5. I have 5 core values that I look at decisions I make every day. One is authenticity, which is just being me and being okay with that. One is vulnerability, which is taking the risk to allow you to see me. One is integrity, which for me is alignment, is what I'm saying lining up with everything. And like I'm just a zealot about that. Is my opinion over here the same over here if we flipped it? If not, I'm out of integrity. Accountability, doing what I say I'm going to do. And the last one is unconditional love, and that is interacting with people with as little judgment as possible and catch myself with my judgments so I can quickly take them off of them and just see them for what they are and who they are versus the labels I've chosen for them. So that's how I make decisions today. And
it's interesting. Integrity to me, and I love the values. Thank you for sharing them. Integrity to me also includes that follow through with what you say. Like does what you say equate with what you do?
Absolutely.
And vice versa. But yeah, I would go with authenticity, courage, lifelong learning, family. I'm missing one. Oh, emotional awareness. Like that exploration of the emotional side of things is very big for me.
And to me, it's not about what our values are, but do we have them? Mm-hmm. And are we clear with what they mean? Because they may mean something different to everyone. And then the big question is, how are you checking them? How are you assuring that you live them? Are they part of your daily life? your daily decision? Do you make decisions with them? Because there are times that I didn't really want to do what my values called for. I can tell you many times that's true. Mm-hmm. But when I look at it and say, wait a minute, like think of one for me is let's say there's a conversation I'm really not excited to have with someone. I really want to avoid the conversation. I said, wait a minute. Is that authentic and vulnerable? It's kind of like, put those away.
And I use the courage value for that. Like, oh my gosh, I got to have this uncomfortable conversation. Well, okay, that's the courageous way to go.
Yeah, it's
the other thing I've used the curiosity value to be more outgoing because I tend to be somewhat introverted, and I kind of find myself to be good company for myself. But I've told myself I'm really curious about other people's stories. And I've told myself that so much that I'll interact with anybody anywhere and just kind of try to connect with them. And if I can get a smile out of them, geez, we both walk away winners.
Well, it's funny you mentioned curiosity because my daily video this morning was on curiosity. And I actually found a new quote. I love finding new quotes because I'm a big Einstein fan.
Me too.
I didn't used to be because I thought he was just this scientist. The guy from a life philosopher, oh my, like you could just read Einstein and get all you need for terms of personal growth and ways to see the world. And the quote he had was, I don't really have any special talents. This is a guy who's a genius, except I'm passionately curious. And I think about that, and without claiming it, that's a key part to how I live my life. Because I'm so curious about things and people and what their story is, and it could be how things work.
It's what makes you a noticer.
Well, exactly. It just drives my everyday existence, and it enriches it so many ways. I'm a big man. Curiosity and like you said, it changes the nature of relationships.
Yeah, there's a great book by Todd Kashdan called Curious. And it's all about kind of the research on curiosity. I'm trying to get Todd. That book's probably 10 years old. I'm trying to get Todd on the podcast, but it's huge. And I mean, like I'll talk to young men about who are dating, right? And I'm like, just leave the outcome aside. In other words, don't worry about if you're going to get her phone number or if you're going to kiss her or have sex with her. Like, don't worry about any of that. Just tell yourself you are an intensely curious person about everyone's stories. So all you want to do is just get to know her story. If anything else happens beyond that, great.
Have you read A Curious Mind?
Who's that by?
It's Brian Grazer, the movie producer.
Oh, is he the guy that used to work with, did he do Ace Ventura?
I don't know if he did that. He's done, I mean, if you look at his list of movies, it's huge.
Okay. I think there was a documentary as well.
He has, the book he's written 3 or 4 books. One is called A Curious Mind, and he talks about his life. He made this decision. He has curiosity conversations. That's what he calls them. And he just reaches out to people and says, I want to have a curiosity conversation with you. And he gets on the phone with them for an hour or on Zoom now. And, you know, he's at a place where he can pretty much get a conversation with anybody in the world. But that's what he does it for. It's not like an interview. It's a curiosity conversation. Tell me a little bit about your story. And, it's interesting how people, I think I did a podcast last week and some people have different formats. They had like their 5 questions, but they have like 30 questions and they randomly pick 5. So you don't know what you're going to get.
Oh, that's cool.
I like that. I said, I don't want to know what the questions are. I don't want to know. But one of the questions was, what are you curious about lately? I go, that's an awesome question. He goes, people,
it is a great question.
I go, I had an easy one because I had just thought about something that morning that I was curious about.
Well, and it's funny, I tend to take everything back to emotion because I think that's what binds us socially, it connects us, but also because it drives almost all of our behavior. So other great questions. What are you excited about lately? What are you passionate about? What are you angry about? All those questions kind of stop and make you think, and you're like, huh. So I'm aware of time, and unfortunately, we have to wrap this up. I think it's been a tremendous conversation, and I'm proud to call you friend because I believe you are a good man. So is there anything in wrapping up that I should have asked you that I didn't?
I love that question. I use that one a lot at the end. I do too. I do. The question you could have asked me that you haven't is, what's my advice to men? That one piece of advice to men.
I love it. Yeah. What's your best idea for men that aren't as far along as you are, perhaps?
It's twofold. One is a message, and the other is, I guess, a perspective. The message is this. It's okay. Everybody's scared. Mm-hmm. We're all scared. It's okay. And there are plenty of places where it's safe for you to be that. And in order to grow, you're going to have to take some risk with that too. And I guess the last piece of that, I guarantee you there are people in your life who are waiting for you. They're waiting for you. Not this pretend you, but you. They're waiting.
Yeah, I love that. And okay, so the very last thing is, where can people get in touch with you if they would like to follow up or learn more?
Cool. Thanks for asking. Easiest way is I'm blessed with an unusual last name. If you can spell my last name, which is Nischwitz. If you Google Jeff Nischwitz, you're pretty much only going to find me. There's nobody else with that name.
Wow.
So that makes it easy. But my website is nischwitzgroup.com. You can email me, jeff@nischwitzgroup.com. Find me on social media. Join the conversation. I love having the conversations in the social media world because it just invites more curiosity and more noticing. And I'll just close with this. I just had I did a video this week about love and how love is essential to leadership. And I had a list of 10 or 12 different ways of talking about what love means in the non-sexual part, romantic way. You know, things like vulnerability and empathy and compassion and respect and treating people with dignity and non-judgment. So somebody wrote a comment on there that I just loved. It happened to be a man, and he wrote, "I'm almost hesitant to use the word love in a business conversation because it feels weak." I go, that's the problem, and that's the opportunity. Mm-hmm. Like, words aren't weak given their context. They're not.
No. Yeah, that's a great note to end on. So thank you very much, Jeff. I greatly enjoyed this conversation.
Well, thanks for having me, John. I really appreciate the invitation and always the opportunity to talk about the life journey, especially for men.
All right. And for you listeners, that's a wrap on this episode of The Evolved Caveman. Be sure to check out past episodes at theevolvedcaveman.com.
Thank you for listening to the Evolved Caveman podcast. If you like what you've heard, support us by subscribing, leaving reviews, and sharing the podcast with friends and colleagues. For the latest, most powerful tools to connect with like-minded men, join the Facebook group at The Evolved Caveman. Follow Dr. John on Instagram at The Evolved Caveman, all one word, or join the email list by visiting guidetoself.com.